Why did you hire an ISA?
It's to really, I think, address the part of this business that no agent really likes to do, which is nurture leads. I run a team of 12. We generate about 100 leads a month. Initially, we had about 3,000 people in a database. It just backlog, just poor notes, not sure where people were.
I think a lot of folks, they're kind of assuming that these internet leads come in like, hey, I want to buy, I want to sell. Well, that's not really how it goes. These tools get better and better at capturing people earlier in the process. The big opportunity for agents right now is to figure out that top of funnel lead and bring it down.
We're actually having pretty good success with that. Probably 2 to 3 appointments a week from our ISA. Now he's doing some circle prospecting for us. That's more top of funnel stuff, but they'll get there eventually. What people don't realize about the sales funnel is as long as you are consistent, your sales funnel should always be full. Every sales an opportunity to stay front of mind, and you really need an ISA to nurture these people to do that.
All right, folks, we are back here with another episode of the show. And I've got a good one for you guys today. We got Kyle Oberlin, client of Power ISA, here to talk about, his ISA project and the kind of results he's gotten. So I'm really pumped about that. But first things first, Kyle, why don't you introduce yourself here to the audience? Who is Kyle? Tell us about your business. And I would love to segue into my first question, which is, why did you hire an ISA? Go for it, Kyle.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Gus. And so I'm Kyle Oberlin. I run a team in Northeast Ohio. So we serve the greater Akron-Canton area. It's about an hour south of Cleveland. And, to answer your question, why have an ISA? It's to really, I think, address the part of this business that no agent really likes to do, which is nurture leads. Lead nurturing is obviously a big undertaking. I run a team of 12. And so, we generate about 100 leads a month. And, that's just, there's a lot of people that are at different parts of the process. You have people that, they're hot and they're ready to go right away, but most of them aren't. Most of them are 3 months out, 6 months out, 9 months out, a year out, maybe non-responsive. And so having an ISA, I think, is very important, and just kind of keep in front of everyone, be able to nurture people as they, just kind of progress through the sales pipeline, and then eventually, hopefully, bring them to the table as either a listing or as a buyer.
I love that, and you touched on a really, big point. I don't know a single team leader that is happy with, the process of lead response, lead nurturing, lead follow, and any level, whether you've got, one team member or a dozen or 50 or 60, right? Because it's a grind. It's probably, one of the difficult parts of the internet lead, conversion process. I think a lot of folks, when they don't know, they're kind of assuming that these internet leads come in like, hey, I want to buy, I want to sell. Okay, great. Some might not, but a lot of them do. Like, well, that's not really how it goes, right? Put yourself in the shoe of someone that's online, and these tools get better and better at capturing people earlier in the process, right? Like I'm pretty sure Facebook knows you're going to buy a house before you do, and they're kind of shepherding over to us, and they're serving you the ads that Facebook thinks you're going to like, right? But that means they're earlier and earlier in the process, and you start the conversation there, but it doesn't end there, right? I love bottom of funnel leads, man. I love those, every day of the week. But the reality is that companies like the Zillows of the world and the Opcities, like they grab those leads and they're going to sell them back to us at a 30% commission, 40% commission, right? Like they want a piece of the action if you're going to get one of those bottom of funnel leads. So I'd argue the big opportunity for agents right now is to figure out that top of funnel lead and bring it down, because you're competing with way less people, and you've got time to build that relationship before they go on Zillow and get sold back to you for a huge amount. And again, not knocking Zillow for that. I'm not blaming them. I think they're adequately pricing those. They're adequately priced, and I know because a lot of agents will pay that 30-40% without blinking an eye. I just don't think that's the big opportunity right now. Right. I think it's what you described, that process of from the beginning to the end. And tell us more about that on your team. Like, is that for you guys? What kind of leads do you generate? What do you typically see as the time frame to really turn an inbound lead into one of your clients and turning it into a closing?
Yeah, and you hit on some good points with, kind of Zillow leads in general, and, just some of the more expensive stuff. But, I think the one thing that you may have missed during that is that even the Zillow ones have opportunity with ISA. So, like ultimately they price their lead gen according to, well, it kind of depends if you're flex or, if you're paying market pricing, but If you're paying market pricing, they're generally, every lead's maybe $450 to $700 in my market. But they kind of assume a 15% close rate on those, right? And so that's kind of how they're priced. And so to me, like 15% is kind of low, right? And so why not utilize an ISA to nurture the expensive stuff too? Because ultimately you're paying for it regardless. If they close or not, if you're market-based pricing, you're still paying for it. And so you might as well. And so that's actually kind of how we started with the ISA stuff. Is I actually was having them nurture the expensive leads, kind of the
Oh
lower funnel.
wow.
And we're having a lot of success with that, because nurturing in any stage is not a fun thing. And so, and it's hard to rely on agents to do that. I can speak from experience, I'm terrible at it as well. So, having that said, initially we had about 3,000 people in a database in our CRM. We used Lofty, and it just backlog, just poor notes, not sure where people were, if they ever bought, if they ever sold. Basically the only people we knew about were the ones that actually transacted. And so that's kind of what our RSA did for the first maybe 6 months, is just calling through all 3,000 people that are in there and just trying to get in touch with people, see where they're at, leave notes, and kind of go through those. Because I think that was a better use of their time initially, because those are intentful people. Like at some point they clicked around the internet and raised their hand and said, hey, give me a call, whether it be from the Dave Ramsey program or from Zillow or from Realtor, wherever they came from, it doesn't really matter. They clicked around the internet and said, hey, somebody should call me, whether they knew they were going to get a call or not. And so, that's kind of how we started. And we're actually having pretty good success with that. Probably 2 to 3 appointments a week from our ISA Evan. That it worked really well, but eventually you run out of those people, right? And so,
True.
when they're calling, anywhere from 50 to 100 a day, just depends on how long the conversations are. Then at that point, you need to do something new. You don't want him calling the same person that he said, hey, I'll follow up with you in 6 months, a week later, just because he's already ahead of everything. So at that point now, now he's doing some circle prospecting for us through Redx. And, obviously you're not going to have as much success with that, because that's more top of funnel stuff like you described initially, but they'll get there eventually, because what people don't realize about the sales funnel is, long as you are consistent, your sales funnel should always be full, because eventually those 6 months out people, it'll be 6 months from now and those people will be ready to go. So, you just got to keep consistent and keep, a process in place to continuously nurture these people.
Yeah, so I love that. So you guys have not, you're a few months into it now. You've got both ends covered. You've got the higher intent, like you said, the expenses, the Glengarry leads. You've got the Glengarry, like the really good ones, and you're filling the rest of the pipeline with something like Circle Prospect, which like I agree with you. It's a lower converting, kind of activity, and it has a long tail. Right. You can, I'm sure you can run into one every now and then from Circle that's more intent based, but the majority of them are going to be folks that are doing something. If you're calling them right now, it's next year, right? Maybe next spring, maybe next summer, I think or maybe next fall, right? Is a good time frame. But you gotta evenly placing your bets, right? It's not all just going to be, Zillow 100% intent. And that's a really good point you bring up too. 15% close rate is great. 85% of those leads might not close in the first 12 months, right? Because I'm pretty sure they measure that on a year. I forget if it's 6 months or a year, but 85% are not going to do something the first year. The second year, right? I think if you measure that ROI, it gets even higher, like way, way, way higher than that. But not everyone has the follow-up systems in place to really get the most out of it. Or even let's grab something in the middle, because you got Circle Prospect, you've got Zillow, like Google pay-per-click is somewhere in the middle, right? It's in there, right? Not the most highest intent, not true cold call, but the average that I've seen across the board for Google pay-per-click on closings is about 12 to 18 months, right? On average, those are going to take that long. So if you only work on it the first year, you might get a couple home runs here and there, but you might barely break even, quite frankly, or just barely above even if you're doing it for a whole year. But the second year is where you get multiples of ROI, right? Like you really start seeing, a lot of these things pay off. So, but the challenge is, a lot of agents, it's hard to stick with that, right? It's hard you have to have the funds to invest. You got to have the team to follow up. You have to have the systems and the process in place. So Kyle, why don't you tell me a little bit, give me a sneak peek, right? Let's say someone comes in, you pick the channel. If they're coming in through Zillow or through something somewhere else, they come into contact with your team. Do your agents call them first and then they hand it off to the ISA? Does the ISA get first shot? And then once they make contact, what does that follow-up process look like? Go for it.
Yeah, so we treat them all a little bit different. So right now with Zillow, we're in a market-based pricing market, and so not that it really matters with how they come in all the same way, which is a direct phone call. So those I feel are, since they are a little bit higher intent, those are best served to go directly to the agent because some of them are also what they call real-time tours. So these are people that just want to
Got it.
go and see a house right away. So that's not really a good use of the ISA's time because most of those will just end up being passed off instantly anyway. And so
Love it.
those go straight to the agent. And then the agent leaves notes that everything parses into Lofty on our end. So no matter what lead source it is, it parses in there. And then our ISA actually works out of Lofty.
Love it.
So they don't access any system besides Lofty, just as kind of like an admin account essentially on their end. And so, if those people aren't ready to go right away, then at that point, that's when the ISA takes over. We have Lofty calls them smart plans, but they're essentially drip campaigns. And so, depending on the lead source, they get kind of a custom drip campaign that they get put on. And so, like if it's a Dave Ramsey lead, for example, we'll kind of throw out some of the Ramsey branding and stuff, and just everything we can do to try to gain some sort of rapport with those leads as they come through. Because I think people want to work with somebody that they have rapport with, and so our ISA Evan has some of those talking points as well. So if it's a Ramsey lead, he's going to be talking up Dave a little bit. If it's Zillow, I think it's important to kind of name drop where you come, like where they came from, so they know why you're
Make
calling
it
them.
contextual. So I love so let's stop on that for a second because that's such a good point, right? Because from our end, we want to, we might have the same script for all internet leads, like right? Internet lead, a Zillow lead. If you treat a Zillow lead the same way you treat like a Facebook lead, I think that's a big mistake. Like massive, massive mistake. The context is completely different. One person's browsing their phone, looking at dog pictures. The other one's looking at houses, like actively looking for homes, right? And maybe wants to go see one. So if you treat those differently, I think you're kind of crazy. And especially if you're coming from Dave Ramsey's program, right, the trusted service provider, like that's a very specific kind of lead, and they are probably a huge fan of Dave Ramsey, right? And they probably have a very specific mindset, worldview on finances, on real estate, and all these things, right? And if you ignore that, I think you do so at your peril. I don't think it's a smart thing to do because that's the whole reason they're reaching out to you, because they trust Dave, because they feel it's a good program, right? So I love that you make it contextual, right? You make the outreach, and so the drip campaigns are contextual. The scripting is contextual as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Love
And
it.
so the drip campaigns they generally last for about 10 days when they come in, give or take. But on the agent side of things, once the agents actually assigned to that lead, which happens instantly, as it comes in, they're if it's Zillow, it's a direct phone call with the agent, so we know who it is. But if not, it goes out as a blast to the team, and then they claim it, and they have a certain amount of time to make that call. But really, on our end, the agents have 3 calls that they need to be making over a course of 3 days, at least attempt wise. Really, before it gets passed off to like Evan and having the ISA reach out. Um, and so, and during those 3 days, there not only those 3 calls, but there are some automated texts and automated emails that go out as well. And again, they're all contextual, based off of how they come in. Because, like you said, it's important to really have that lead understand who we are and why we're reaching out to them. And if, with for Ramsey, for example, we're also paying to use their branding. So you might as well use it. If not, you're just throwing
100%.
that money away. And then, from there, at that point, it's really on kind of the agent a little bit. A little bit depends on the funnel, right? And so if they're still pretty hot, ready to go, but maybe just not responsive, I think it's kind of a tag team effort with the ISA and the agent. But if it's like kind of a far out nurture, then at that point, we're pretty just reliant on the ISA to kind of keep in touch, keep notes, and just kind of let us know when they're ready, and then set that appointment when they are ready to do that. But then also another piece of it too is on the lending side, because I kind of look at a lender as almost like a free ISA, because they're also in a commission based environment too, to where they're only getting paid if they close. But every lead source is a little bit different, because we do have lender leads that come through that we obviously had to respect that relationship that we had that they already have with the lender. Like a Veterans United, for example. But then you have something like Zillow or Ramsey that come through that don't have any kind of obligation to try to maintain that relationship on the lending side. So, at that point too, we're not only are the drip campaigns pushing them to the lending, but also the ISA kind of knows some of the talking points to sell our lender. Because once we can get them, and he has set appointments for our lender as well.
Love it.
And
Love
so,
that.
which is kind of nice because now if they get pre-approved, for example, or even just talk to our lender, now they're hearing from the lender, they're hearing from the ISA, they're hearing from us. And, I think just the kind of the more people that are points of contact and kind of moving them along, the better chance you have at actually converting them.
Yeah, I love that. And this is going out for all the vendors and so all the mortgage brokers in the audience. You should be the ISA. I love the way you put it, right? You should be the free ISA for agent. If I were a lender starting out brand new, I would call every agent, and instead of just taking them out for coffee, which that'd be fun too, I would say, if you have leads, I'll call them for you. Like I will call them. I'll how many you've got? 100, 1,000, 1,500. Like I don't have a bunch of money, but I have a bunch of time, right? Let me pick up the phone and add some value, because in my experience, sometimes people will struggle whether it's appropriate or not to talk to an agent. Like they might need some education on that, but they need zero education about talking to a mortgage broker, right? You're like, oh yeah, that's the money thing. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know how much can afford. I'm not. Well, let's have our lender ask us about that. Oh, I have had some credit issues in the past. Our lender's the best guy to walk you through that, how to fix that. Right? There's a million questions that the answer is the lender, and for me, sometimes that was an easier sell to get them talking to the lender. But the challenge is having a lender knows how to convert, right? I think that was really the big thing. They had to know how to work leads, and not just kind of be used to having them kind of handed off to them, ready to go. Like this is locked and loaded, ready to buy. So just finding it. So lenders out there, be that guy. Be that person that helps your agent partners nurture and convert these leads. Not just service transaction ready clients. Those are the best. I love those. But man, you add a ton of value if you do it that way. So I love that, and you incorporate it into the lead, follow up and nurturing process. Because if you're solving problems for these people, by connecting them with a great lender, by giving them information, holy cow, right? Like you're really solidifying that relationship. I got, I saw this quote. This is from Coach Barry Jenkins, right? He's a big lead conversion guy. And he said, we should measure when we're talking to these internet leads, right? Regardless of where they're from. Like you said, 85% of even Zillow leads are not going to transact right away. 85%, right? Like, conservatively. So what do you do with them? Like, we should measure the success of these leads instead of time to appointment. Like how fast can we set an appointment with them? Because a lot of them are not going to want that. Time to value. How quickly can we add value to them, right? Give them some information, a little nugget, maybe like a PDF, maybe a video, maybe just knowledge, just talk to them about a topic they don't know about, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. And, and they struggle with seeing the need to talk to an agent. Right? They like, what? I'm like 6 months out. I'm a year out. Why would I want to talk to an agent? Like, well, let me. We should be the ones telling them that. Well, there's like 18 different things you need to learn about this whole process. But no worry, we're here to help you out, right? So and introducing them to a great mortgage broker is one of those things. Like, hey, let's figure out the financing part of this. Oh, but I'm not ready to buy. No worry. Like now's a great time to fix any issues, to learn these things. Nothing's going to harm you if you know about it a little bit ahead of time. Oh, that's probably makes sense. Great. Let's kind of move on with that. So I love you guys. You guys incorporate that like into the lead nurturing, into the lead follow-up process. And so your ISA Evan, basically after those first 3 days, right, the agents get first shot at converting these leads. Then they get passed off to Evan, I'm missing whether they talk to them or not. If they're just going to be further out, Evan takes over kind of like a concierge kind of mode, right? That they remember your team kind of following up with these leads. And that goes on, and it can be a few months, it can be a year until they're ready to go, like until they're ready to book an appointment with that lead. Then they get handed back to the agent, right?
Yeah, exactly. And and I think you hit on a couple good points just there that I think as an agent, you want to try to provide as much value as you can to the process. And that really requires you to be kind of the knowledge broker for the whole thing. And
Right.
During that, kind of show of knowledge, connecting with lending, and like obviously you kind of needed to know some of the talking points on the lending side, but for the most part that's a separate licensure, and so it's good to be able to pass that off. But you really want to be kind of like their guy, so to speak, for real estate, whether it needs to be the lending side, the home inspection side, just tips and tricks to work on your credit, tips and tricks, get your house ready to list, just all those little things. But, I think something that a lot of agents do that are it just ends up being a complete waste of time is, they might have one showing with them, right when they come in, they're hot and ready and, they have a really good rapport with them and, blah, blah, blah. And then they want to wait till either rates drop or, until next, like, maybe next spring because Ohio, I mean, it gets miserably cold and nobody really wants to move in the wintertime. And so,
Yeah.
like most of the market kind of pops off in the spring and kind of dies in the winter. But you might have that great conversation with them, say this August, but they're like, okay, I'm going to wait till next April. Well, if they don't hear from that agent during that time, next April, who knows, their cousin might have got licensed or, they might have met somebody at dinner or, a networking event or something. And, so that's why staying in front of them is so important because, I think I can speak from that personally earlier in my career. When my follow-up game was kind of trash is that I would have just a really good appointment with somebody. And then, I'd find out a year later on Facebook that they bought a house. It's like, and really I'm to blame in that situation. It's not them. I just obviously didn't do a good enough job of staying in front of them.
Yeah, 100%. I love you, Brett, bring that up because the consumer's bombarded, right? I mean, this wasn't like it was, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Like people are on social media, and I forget what the crazy number is of the amount of ads people see every day, right? Billboards, and if they're watching TV or they're watching YouTube or social media or TikTok, whatever it is, right? There's all these, they're trying to get their attention. Like you've got, some of these, billion-dollar companies trying to get their attention, trillion-dollar companies trying to get their attention, and a lot of agents. And these algorithms, Kyle, are getting so good at figuring out what our intent is. You know what? Once they send out that form, they have that conversation for you. You know what's going to happen to them right after that? They're going to get bombarded with real estate ads, right? Because these platforms are just that good, right? They can figure this out either through they found that cookie from that Zillow, or they saw what your behavior on social media is that of a home buyer, whatever it is. They're going to get served. Every single agent in the market is going to talk to them right after you've spoken with them. So you're absolutely right. No, I mean that problem is always a threat, but it's even worse now, I think, than it's ever been before because the platforms are so good at this. But what's going to make you stand out? It's not just everyone trying to help you sell their home or offer you more properties. It's Kyle and his team. Like they helped me out. Like they added. It's valuable for me to talk to them. They taught me something I didn't know, right? And that teaching them something they don't know, like that's the game nowadays. I feel that's really what it's about, right? Can they see you as someone that's valuable to talk to respond to your next text, to pick up that next call? Maybe even it's only a month or two away, but you've got to make that call, right? That's really that's the kind of the crux of it, right? I love. I'm an email marketer myself. I love email. I love I do content all the time. I love that. We would not close deals at Power ISA if we don't pick up the phone and make it happen, right? And we love content and I love email, and those are great tools, but they're not strong enough, to put the offer in front of people, to ask them how it's going, to see what's going on. It can keep you top of mind, it can keep you relevant to them, but there's not. Again, we're recording this in the fall of 2025. As of now, nothing is as powerful as having that two-way conversation, right? So, and every team has to solve that problem. Maybe it's the agent, maybe they have an ISA, maybe they have, a team of agents. You've got to bridge that gap. And I think it's very easy sometimes for us to kind of get enamored with the automation and the AI chatbots and all these other things. And I go, yeah, those are great at maybe identifying leads, identifying the hand raisers. Those are really good tools, but they're not going to close the deal for you, right? You kind of pick up the phone and kind of have to make it happen. So speaking of that, Kyle, what would a typical follow-up sequence look like for you guys? You had a conversation with someone, let's say they're a year out. Oh, I'm just getting started. I think we'll be doing something maybe, like you said, next spring, next summer, next year. Is that so? I know from what you just said, you're not going to call them next year, right? You're not going to call them a year from now. But what would that follow-up process kind of look like? Is it like is the ISA checking in every month, every couple months, depending on their time frame? What would that look like?
Yeah, I think it's hard to kind of bucket that into a like a set thing because everyone's going to be a little bit different. But let me hit on a real quick point that you made with calling. I think that's a very underrated thing too, because not only do you want to add the most value to somebody, but you gotta make those calls and you gotta stay in front of them. And I had this big banner down in our other office that says real estate is a contact sport, because it really is. You got to be making contact with people, and phone calls are the best way to do it. I had this little funny picture actually on the wall. I might go grab it and show it to you. But it basically, it's like a cartoon of an agent reaching out to a lead, and it says, the leads aren't picking up. It's like, well, did you call them? Oh no, I texted them. Okay, well, did you call them? No, I emailed them. It's like you got to call them. Like, I mean, people, you got to call people. It is what it is. And if you're afraid of the phone, then maybe a sales position isn't for you. In the grand scheme of things. But back to your question about the follow up. We actually, I think that's one of the things that I struggle with a little bit is kind of setting those standards, because I think it is something it's hard to set a standard around. I probably trust, I don't know if I trust, Evan and the coach too much to do that, but, I kind of just leave it up to them. I'm a busy guy myself. And so, I think it's hard for me to really manage the ISA, and that's why I have the managed package with you guys. And so, I really leave that up to Rose, the coach, and to Evan to kind of set that cadence and use their best judgment, because ultimately the incentive and structure is aligned for Evan to procure these leads at some point, right? And so
get booked appointments, attended, qualified, attended, booked appointments, 100%.
yeah, and so I think that for him, he does this every day, so I trust kind of his judgment on this, because like that old Charlie Munger quote, "You show me the incentive, I'll show you the result." Well, the incentive is there, so I think with Evan, it's just getting the results and figuring out the best way to do that, and whatever he does, I trust him to do it.
I love that. And kind of touching again on that point you brought up about the phone call. It's almost funny to me how relevant that is now, when everyone, I might have even thought, oh, maybe people are not going to pick up the phone anymore in a few years, right? This is me thinking a few years back. Maybe it'll all be text based, right? And that hasn't happened yet. I want to be clear to folks, right? I'm not. And again, let's be super clear what I mean. I don't think folks like phone calls more now than they did before. I don't think that's true. I think I've had leads tell me, hey, I don't talk to my mom over the phone. Why do you think I'm going to talk to you? Like, people will avoid, especially younger folks, will avoid the phone call. That being said, right, maybe the first point of contact with that generation isn't going to be the phone call. Maybe they start over text. Great, that's phenomenal. The DM, slide into those DMs, get that text message going. But the goal is to get them on the phone, right? It might take a little bit more work, but because nothing. And again, I'm happy to be proven wrong about this. Nothing converts like a two-way conversation. Text can be very passive. It's asynchronous, so they can respond to you 2 days later. It's very easy to do, right? But there's something about that two-way conversation that just makes that connection happen. And it makes it much, much stronger, regardless of what age the person is. I've found it doesn't really matter. Once you're having a two-way conversation, once they're past the awkwardness of receiving the call, they might not like, but it's from a number they already texted. It's not showing up as spam likely. They're coming in. Okay, this is probably Kyle. Like the iPhone says, this is probably Kyle calling you, right? So I mean, you want to pick up or not? Okay, well, sure, right? That's you just got to get your foot in the door, right? That's
And
how
it's
I
important
explain
for them to make that
guys.
decision.
We
I
just got
think
to start
that's
the conversation.
something that's important too, is like, let them make that decision. Like, yeah, people might, they might hate calling and they want to text. Well, great. Don't assume that. Just let them make that decision for themselves. Try to call. If they don't answer and they text you back, then guess what? Now it's pretty obvious that they prefer texting. But I do agree with you that two-way conversation is important, because you don't know. The thing with texting is it lacks tonality. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
you're
Oh
either
yeah.
speaking in caps or speaking in lowercase. But even then, sometimes it's hard to tell if someone's yelling at you, or they just don't know how to text. So that tonality is important, and there's never going to be. I mean, the best way to always build rapport is face to face, but the second is always going to be over some sort of video call or just phone call, because at least you have that tonality. You can let your personality shine a little bit. You can almost tell if somebody's happy and smiling on the other side of the phone or not, but you'll never know that through a text or an email. So
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. Everything that Cal. Well, and that's why the bots are really good at texting. Let's be honest about that. I mean, that's why these tools excel in the text space and the email space, because you kind of don't need that. It doesn't really come through, not necessarily, especially in texting. Because it's so brief, it's so to the point, right? You send a big wall of text over it, it's just not going to work. It's not going to have the same effect. But once you have that conversation going, then the personality, then you've got a better shot at this, right? I'm not going to fight anyone over saying people don't prefer, people don't like phone calls like they used to. I think that's true. But like you said, let's let them decide if they want to take this call. This might be worth it for them to have a conversation quick 5 minute conversation to clarify the kind of property they're looking for, to explain, what the current market's looking like, to explain that mortgage, offer you guys have on the ad, whatever it is, right? The two-way conversation is way more efficient at that. The texting has a lot of limitations on tone, on length, on depth, like all these things. I think that nothing's going to really beat that two-way conversation. And I think and then the limitation is time, right? Because yes, it does take a lot of time. You got to sit down every day, kind of make those calls. I think an ISA is a great way to kind of bridge that gap, right? Because we ask the agents to do a lot of things too, right? I'm going to put my agent hat back on instead of the ISA guy, the agent guy. We do want the agents to be that concierge, the negotiator, the customer service specialist, and the telemarketer and the lead follow-up guy, and all these things, right? So I think I think a huge value that teams provide, like yours, is to take some of those things off their plate and have them focus on the $1,000 an hour activity, which is taking appointments and signing up clients, negotiating deals. That's like the top of the top, right? And some of these other activities, they can be handed off. Like the staff can take them on, right? A virtual assistant can take them on because it is not a $1,000. It's not a $1,000 an hour activity to do that. Having the valuable conversation is, but queuing up that conversation for an agent, I would argue that's a much, much lower cost activity, and have the agents focus on what they do best. They're going to like life more. They're going to enjoy being on the team more. They're going to see a huge value of being on the team. I think it's a great value prop that you guys build for the agents. If you can just take away some of these activities that they're not great at them, and it's not really worth their time, right? So that's a pretty good combo. Of things they probably shouldn't be spending a ton of time on, and they should be just focusing on their clients, right? Their active clients, turning prospects into clients, and servicing, these clients. I think it should be the number one thing they do. So Kyle, I don't know, that sound about right? Is that something you guys provide as a value proposition for the team?
Yeah. I mean, it's you pretty much hit the nail on the head. What is the highest and best use of your time as an agent? And it's really on the buyer side. It's out showing homes, writing offers, negotiating contracts. And on the seller side, it's marketing a house, right? So, I always kind of look at it as like the buyer side is more of a customer service position. The listing side is more of a sales position. But, to your point too, as a newer agent, you're not going to be great at having those initial conversations. And, so if you could have somebody that knows how to do it because they do it, multiple times a day, every day, 5 days a week, then that's great, And so, I think it is a big value add, and it is hard as a solo agent or even a small team to really afford something like this. But it's an economies of scale thing. So that's kind of a value proposition that say those medium to large teams can usually kind of budget, because it's ultimately just going to add a huge value proposition to the agents. Because again, I can't stress this enough. Nobody likes to nurture. I don't. If you like to nurture, then you're lying. I don't think anybody actually likes to nurture.
Yeah, 100%. Agents are usually really world class at that first phone call. Maybe or like the first couple phone calls, they're really, really good at that. And it's diminishing returns after that. So it's harder. It's like it doesn't do great. They do great at the first couple calls, and then not that great at the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth call, right? And I think
Because it's demoralizing.
that's 100% true. It is, especially you're talking about someone that hasn't even responded yet, right? Once you're on the fifth call, I think you're hating life at that point. Like, oh, I don't know if this. You want to be talking to clients, which is what you do best, right? Talking to motivated buyers, motivated sellers. Like that's really what you want to do as an agent, but there's a process to that, and the way teams can make that as easy as possible, man, that really, really makes the agents life better, 100%. So Kyle, want to ask you, so you've got this process in place, you've got a bunch of leads, you've got a lot of high value lead sources coming in, you decide to plug in an ISA to help kind of have you already had like a lead generation machine in place, right? You've got the lead sources, you have the agent, you have the process, you plugged in an ISA to make it more efficient, to make it better, and like optimize it. What have been the results so far, right? How would you describe what has been the result of having an ISA plugged into this lead gen system?
Yeah, I think that's a couple points there. Right off the rip, I think that the way that we did it is the reason I did the way we did is because again, for me it wasn't to generate new leads, which you can certainly use an ISA to generate new leads, if you want to, but for me it was mostly just increasing our conversion percentage of the existing leads. And so that was always my top priority, because again, we've already paid for those, we've already, they're already intentful. And so if anything, in a weird way, as a team leader, it kind of gives me peace of mind that like I can't really be frustrated if I know the nurture isn't there or the follow up's not there, because at least I know somebody's doing it, right? And so
Yeah,
I think
100%.
that peace of mind is important as a team leader, that you're not just throwing money down the drain and just lighting it on fire, because at least Evan at minimum is reaching out to these people, and so there's that value to it. But our success obviously has been good. I wouldn't pay for the service if it wasn't working or wasn't having a return on investment. So
Love it.
I think that, really long as on our end, our break even is like 2 appointments a month, for us to have those 2 appointments a month that then convert, pretty much pays for Power SIA. So, long as we stick to that, we're good. But, I know there's also like a residual effect to it too. Like you had mentioned that, 15% might convert that first year, but then there might be another 30% the next year. Or, I think also every sale you got to look at as a multiple opportunity, because if you do a good job,
Correct.
it's really seeds to the garden is kind of how I look at all the leads, because even if they're expensive up front, say they do come with a referral fee tied to it of 30-40% or whatnot, that next deal is not going to have that. And so whether it be them selling that 3 years from now, or them referring their cousin or neighbor or whoever to you, or just building your book of business and building your reputation, there's all those residual effects to sales. And so I think that's why it's important to not necessarily give up after a year, or so. Like I tell people all the time, anything I sign up for, I'm going to at least give it a year, because after a year, that pipeline, it might take that long to fill it up. It just kind of depends
Yeah.
on what you're feeding the machine. And depending on what you feed it, it might take a year to get something out of it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And with that year time frame, you might have like a lot of closed transactions. But the more, I think the bigger question is, what's my pipeline looking like? How many people do I have that I feel are going to transact in the future? Is that 1%, 5%, 10%? I just recorded a conversation with an agent that built, I think it was like a 4-person circle prospecting team, which is that's a weird thing to do, right? Because that takes a long time to show results. So the first 6 months, four full timers, first 6 months, zero listings, zero. Right. And I'm like, how'd you stick with that? He goes, because he was having the conversations. And he's been in the business long enough to go, are these people going to transact in the future? Yes or no? And he goes, that was kind of keeping him going. And the next 3 months, 11 listings. Okay. Zero the first 6 months, which is typical for Circle Prospect, quite frankly. And then the next 3 months, 11. And he goes, and it's the end of the year, towards the end of the year. Right. So next year, he's already anticipating, I'm going to blow this out of the water with the pipeline I've built this year. Next spring is going to blow up. Right. But you have to have that. You have to be thinking about that. Like, what is my immediate result? 12 months. I would call that short-term result. And what's my expected, future result? What am I going to see in the future because I've built a pipeline? And you're right. I agree with you 100%. You should have that residual, that multiplier effect of every deal. But to really do that, you have to have a process. You have to have some kind of a system. If you're kind of just waiting for people to come back to you, it's not going to happen, right? Like I said, remember that I mentioned that the gazillion ads people get served, and the algorithms that want to take their attention and give it to your competition, right? That is really, really effective. So you've got to have, something to reach back out to them, to keep them top of mind, to get that referral, to get that next deal down the line, maybe a few years down the line, or even that review. Reviews are worth, a ton, in a market like this, right? So all of those things can come, but you got to have like a plan. You got to have a system. You have to process to really get the most out of these leads, out of these deals. Because I agree with you. Every listing should give you, I think, an additional transaction or 2 additional transactions, right? A well-marketed, well-worked listing can produce 2 other pieces of business, like a buy side and another listing, right? But easier said than done, right? That it takes a lot of work to really accomplish something like that, right? So I think we all aspire to. So, anyways, Kyle, I appreciate your time. One last question: if you were talking to another team leader right, has got, a few thousand leads in the CRM. They've got their team, like most of them do. They got their team making the calls, and you mentioned it. Man, maybe they're not sleeping as easy. Saying, "Oh, I wonder if if people, if they called my leads today, if they were working the leads the way they should." If they have those concerns, if they have that in the back of their mind all the time, what would you recommend they do? Because they might be having, a lot of doubts about it, right? Hey, what should I bring someone on? What if they're not any good? Might take a few iterations to get people. It might take a really long time for it to work. What would you say to someone that's on the fence about bringing in an ISA to help them optimize and increase their lead conversion?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty no brainer. But long as that's your weakness in nurturing, and if you say it's not your weakness, and I know you're lying, so it's probably going to be your weakness. And so you have to at least just take that step. I think a lot of agents deal with that too when they go to like potentially hire their first administrative assistant. Like you're just like, oh, I don't know what to give up. It is nerve wracking. And also it's money out of your pocket that you might think that you can't afford potentially, but it's all about return on investment and return on time. If you can spend your time, doing other things that are the higher dollar value activities, and that's what you want to do, because really staying front of mind is so important in this career. Like my team's 12 people out of 40,000 agents in Ohio, and those other 39,000 and some change are all looking to get the same deals we are. But and it doesn't really matter how good of an agent you are. It just matters if you're the last person that they think of right before they go make a decision. So, and I'm sure every agent watching this can kind of attest to that. Is you're thinking like, man, I can't believe this poor buyer hired this person, doesn't know what the heck they're doing. Blah blah blah. Well, guess what? They get plenty of business just because they stayed front of mind somehow to that person. Right. And whether it be an ISA or just paying expensive hot leads to come through, some way they got in front of that person, or got remembered, and you didn't. So every sales an opportunity to stay front of mind, and you really need an ISA to nurture these people to do that.
I love it 100%. And you're correct. I don't know, like I said, I don't know any team leaders that are happy with their lead conversion, ever, which was just, I think that's a good feeling to have. How can I get a little bit better? Because when you're at the scale of a team, a 1% improvement on conversion rate, whether that's conversion to appointment or conversion to sign, pick one, right? That's real money. Like that's a big result, because you've already got deals coming through. You're spending that money on the lead generation side. Like a 1% increase, whether it's on that show rate, on that booked appointment rate, met appointment rate, converted at the listing presentation, at the buyer presentation, 1% increase is massive, right? Because it's all going to be profit, right, for the team, and you're already at scale, right? So those optimizations, those improvements, that's exactly how people should be thinking about this. How can I make my team better? Yeah, you're not happy with it. Most team leaders are not happy with it, right? And like you said, if there are, they're probably lying. But how do you make it better? I think is the better question to ask, right? How are you trying to improve? Because just kind of berating your agents about it is not a good strategy, right? Like, oh, I've met team leaders, man. I'm surprised, they don't actively hate their agents, right? Like, hey, no, how do we focus them on what they do best? I think you're doing it the right way, Kyle. How do we focus them on their highest value activities, what they enjoy doing? We got into real estate not to call leads. We got into real estate to work with people, right, and help people and give them a really great experience, right? So how do you spend more time doing that? So I think that's the right way to do it. So Kyle, I appreciate you, man. Congrats on your success, and thanks for this. And we'll see you on the next one.
Hey, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you, man. I'll talk to you soon.